Hello, I'm glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire, and today I have two cards for you showing lots of different techniques. First of all, we'll do some multi-inking stamping. So this will give you beautiful blended stamping. It's super easy to do. I'll also share some ideas for taking smaller images and filling a background very easily with them. And then I'll share how to create window sentiments. One of my cards is even a shaped card. Almost all of the products that I use today are from the new Gina K Designs All Things Spring card kit. Her card kits are packed full of products, and the nice thing is there are a few different styles in the kit, so you can get a lot out of it. Now, in this particular kit this month, we have two large 6x8 stamp sets. Those are the two you see here. I'll be using them today. There's also a smaller stamp set, then a set of 4 layering stencils to create a beautiful carnation. Then there are coordinating dies for most of the stamp images. This is really packed full and very affordable. Gina prices these very low, so it's a great way to get a lot of different products for a good price. Now, this is the first 6x8 stamp set in the kit, and I'm crazy about this set. I'll use it for my first card. Know that there are coordinating dies for some of these images and for the sentiments. There are 2 large images in this stamp set that I'll be using today. One creates these kind of funky looking flowers, and one creates the leaves that fit together. Keep in mind there are individual flowers and leaves in this set that you can use as accents and dies for those. But I'm just using these 2 large images together to create a background. I will also use the Thanks So Much sentiment along with the coordinating die to create a window a bit later on. I'll be using these stamps to create a rainbow background of flowers. So I'm starting with my MISTI stamping tool, and I have my Simon Says Stamp placement guide. This is really helpful in getting things centered on your cards. I have a card panel in there that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I'm going to place those 2 layering images together. So this is how they'll line up when we stamp them. I'm just putting them on top of each other so I can figure out how much room I need for the image. I'm just going to hold them together right now. And I'm placing them onto that placement guide above those 2 plus signs in the center. That's the center line. Instead of drawing a pencil line to figure out where the center was, I can use this placement guide. So I'm putting those 2 stamps above those 2 plus signs right there along the middle. Then I'll remove the leaf stamp. I'm just going to start with the flower stamp first. So I'm going to remove the leaf stamp, close the door on my stamping tool. I can remove the placement guide, and now I know I can stamp this on the top half of this card panel. Again, it's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Okay, now let's start our multi-inking. I'm inking up just the top corner of my stamp with Wild Dandelion ink. You could use any inks here. I like Gina K because her colors are beautiful. Now notice I'm coming in with the blending brush to soften the harsh edge. So the edge where the ink stops, I'm kind of just dabbing my brush on it to soften it so we don't have these hard lines of ink on the stamp. Okay, now for the next color. This time I'm using my blending brush to apply the ink. That way I can really control where this orange is going. I just want it kind of at a diagonal next to the yellow. I do want some of this ink to overlap the yellow so we get a nice blend. And I do want this orange ink to kind of go a bit farther so that I can overlap it with my next color when I get to it. By using a blending brush, I again can control where the ink goes, and I can also make sure that I have soft edges so we get that nice blending. So you can see how beautiful that yellow blends into the orange. Now we can move on to the pink. I'm putting down some passionate pink ink, and then notice that harsh edge there. I'm softening it with my blending brush. So you could either go direct to the stamp with your ink pad and then soften it with the brush, or you could apply the ink with the brush and just stamp it a few times. So now I have that pink ink building, and notice it is overlapping with the orange, which creates kind of a red look. Once I'm done, I will use my Ultra Clean Stamp Cleaner and my Hero Arts Scrubber Block to really clean the ink off of that stamp. I'll wipe it with a wet cloth and then a dry cloth, and it's time to do more stamping. Now, instead of repositioning this image, I'm just going to take my cardstock and rotate it. And that way I can stamp the same image on the other half of my card panel. Remember, I placed this stamp so that it was not crossing that center line, right? so this will not overlap. So now we're going to form this really nice card panel by stamping the smaller image twice to create a full background. Now I want to continue with this kind of diagonal blend of color. So I want some of the pink that we started with the last image to kind of extend to this one. So you'll see me put down that passionate pink. I'll use the brush to soften the edges and even to apply some of the ink. You will get a lighter image when you ink up your stamp with the brush as opposed to an ink pad, but that's okay. You can stamp it multiple times and it allows you to build up that color. Now my Wild Wisteria ink pad needs to be re-inked, so this took me a few stamped images to get all the ink down. And again, I'm using my blending brush, and notice that I'm overlapping some of that soft purple edge with the soft pink edge, which will give us that natural blend. Now I'm moving on to powder blue and just putting a little bit of this to overlap the Wild Wisteria. And then I'll finish off with Blue Lagoon in the corner, making sure that it overlaps. So if you've ever watched a video from me, you know that when I do an ink blended background, I say the key to blending is overlapping inks, and it's the same thing with this multi-inking. And using the blending brush for the softer edges really gives for a continuous look. Now it's time to come in with the next image, which is the leaves that kind of fills in between these little funky flowers. Now notice the bottom left leaf there overlaps with that pink flower. So I'm going to do a bit of masking just so we don't get an overlapped look. You could leave it as is, but I wanted to get a very clean look. So I am taking a piece of Gina K Masking Magic and just cutting a little round edge to it so that I can place it over that flower. There's no need to create a mask for the entire flower. I just need it for that top edge there where the leaf may stamp on top of it. So I'll just place that on top, and now we can get onto our leaf stamping. Now for this, I'll do multi-inking but with different shades of green. I'll first come in and stamp the image a couple times with key lime ink. This is another ink pad that needs re-inking. I'm about halfway through re-inking all of my Gina K ink pads. I find that I use re-inkers a bit more than I used to because I use so much ink when I do ink blending. But really, I stamp all the time, and I re-ink like maybe every 1 or 2 years, so it's not a common thing. But it is time for this whole collection to get a nice re-inking. So I stamped that with the key lime ink. And now I'm coming in with Lucky Clover, which is a little bit darker, more of a Kelly green. And I'm inking my brush really well with that ink and then dabbing that ink onto the stamp, but just at the base of the leaves. Now this will give us a subtle kind of ombre look on these leaves because the leaves are the lighter key lime green. And now at the base of those leaves, I put a little bit of Kelly green. Now, it didn't show enough contrast, so I'm coming in with pine, which is darker. It's Christmas pine, and I'm putting that again at the base of the leaves, just a little bit. And this will add even more contrast. So now we have multi-inked these green leaves to give them the look of dimension. So there you can see that darker at the base. And you can repeat that process as many times as you want. I do think inking up your stamp with a blending brush is a great way to control the color so you don't end up with too harsh of lines. Now I can rotate that paper in my stamping tool once again, cover up that flower with that mask, and stamp the green on this side. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing. I stamp with key lime, ink blended a little bit of Lucky Clover and pine onto those leaves. Not going to show the whole process here, but I did the exact same thing. So now we have the leaves on the top and the bottom. And look at this. We have an entire rainbow card panel that we made with those smaller images. And it really is fun to get that blended look. If you're not into rainbows, you could do blending of other colors too. Next, I'm going to make this card panel a bit smaller by using a die from the new Gina K Designs, a Master Layouts 14 die set. Now, Master Layouts are die sets with a lot of great useful layering dies or basic dies that you can use for a variety of cards. This newest Master Layouts has this great faux postage panel and also a rectangle that's slightly bigger with faux stitching on the inside edge. I'm not going to use the postage panel today, which, by the way, there is a stencil that lines up with it. I'm just going to use that rectangle with the faux stitching. So I'll use the rectangle to cut from our rainbow flower panel, and I'll also cut a piece of black cardstock that is regular card size. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, just a plain panel. Then I also have a mini note card that I made. This is a top folding note card that's the same size as our rainbow floral panel. So this will be a flap on the front of our card that opens up. Next, I'll take the Thanks So Much coordinating die. We'll use the stamp in a moment and cut this right from the center of our panel. I'm creating a window for our sentiment, which is just a fun way to offer something different for your card. And I'm using my Simon Says stamp placement guide just to make sure it's centered before I run it through my die cut machine. Okay, so I've cut the hole the window for the Thanks So Much. Now I'll take that little mini note card that's cut to the same size, and I'll hold it behind this rainbow panel. I will then pop the die into that opening on the rainbow panel, keeping that note card and the panel in the same position, lined up nicely. Run that through our die cut machine, and that will put the window for the Thanks So Much in the front of the note card, not just on the rainbow panel. So now they both have the opening in the exact same spot and will line up wonderfully. Now, I found the easiest way to add your sentiment for that window is to stamp it onto a piece of white cardstock. I'm stamping with Gina K Black Obsidian ink, and I'll use that coordinating die once again to cut it out. I like to stamp my sentiment lightly a few times to make sure it gets nice and crisp. All right, now let's put our card together. I have all my pieces ready, and I also have a little piece of acetate, and that will form the window. You don't have to have this here. You could just have a hole for the window, but I like the bit of shine acetate gives. So I'm putting Gina K adhesive on the back of our floral panel, and I'm putting a small piece of scrap acetate, it could be recycled material, behind the window. I'll put a little more adhesive on that, and now this will line up on the front of our little mini card, making sure those windows line up nicely. Now all we need to do is add our Thanks So Much sentiment on the inside. I find the easiest way to do that is to put adhesive on the back of the Thanks So Much, open up your card, place it into the window with the adhesive facing up, and then close your card backing onto it. This will ensure that it lines up with the window once it's glued inside. If you don't want to do a window, you could instead just pop that sentiment right on top of the floral panel. Now I'll put glue on the back of this and add it to that black cardstock panel. So the opening on this is that mini card on the front, and it'll still stand up nicely, believe it or not. So here is the completed card. I did add a few Moonstone gemstones to the background just so we could have a little bit of sparkle that wasn't too distracting. I really wanted the focus to be on the bold rainbow stamping and that sentiment window. So this rainbow stamping technique can be done with a variety of ink colors on a variety of larger images. I'll give you another example in a moment. And this window sentiment is really easy to do with any sentiment that you have a die that coordinates with. Or you could do a sentiment with just a basic circle window. Okay, let's move on to our next card. This also has some rainbow stamping. I have some more tips for you, and is also a shaped card with a sentiment window. For this one, I'll be using the other 6x8 stamp set that comes in the kit. I have a piece of 5x7 white cardstock here. I thought I was going to make a bigger card. I ended up cutting it down, but I started with 5x7. I'm using another of the Simon Says stamp placement guides. This one is for a variety of card sizes, included 5x7, and it allows you to really easily line images up. So I'm lining this beautiful image up from that card kit, and I'm making sure that it's centered towards the top half of this panel. And I'll be doing that same technique where I stamp on the top portion and then rotate it and stamp on the bottom, but doing the rainbow a bit differently. So now let's get started with our multi-inking. I'm starting with the Blue Lagoon this time, and I'm inking it onto my stamp with my blending brush. Again, if you ink up your stamp with the blending brush, you'll have to stamp it a few times to get a darker look. However, if you just stamp it once, you can get a very light version of whatever stamp you're doing. So it's a great way to get more out of your ink colors too. So I stamp that blue onto one side, and I'm rotating and stamping it onto the other side. So this is a little bit different than last time. This time I'm doing the same inking on the top and the bottom. Now it's time to move on to the next color, which is Lucky Clover. You could do key lime here if you wanted to. Notice that when I ink this up, I am overlapping the ink that I put down before, and that gives you that blend, and it also makes it look like you used more colors. One of my favorite things about this technique is you don't need to clean your stamp as you're doing this process. The ink that's on your stamp is the same blend that you're stamping, so no need to clean it. You can do this technique, by the way, with a variety of inks. You could use dye inks, distress inks, oxide inks, pigment inks. It really doesn't matter. I reach for Gina K inks a lot because I feel like she has classic colors, and those classic colors are great for blending, especially if you're doing a rainbow. But again, I know rainbow cards aren't for everyone. I love them, but you could instead do maybe like a purple to blue to green blend, really anything you want. If you do enough overlapping, you can pretty much get every color to blend. Now notice when I do this, I used yellow ink. I used Wild Dandelion, but I didn't leave much of that yellow to show. I have very little yellow showing between the orange and the green because sometimes if you have a rainbow and part of the image is in yellow, it kind of disappears because it's so light compared to everything else. So by keeping the amount of yellow area small, it keeps the whole image bold. And by including the yellow and not going directly from orange to green, you get a good blend. So I do keep yellow in there. It's just not showing a whole lot. And I really love how when the Passionate Pink overlaps with the Sweet Mango, you get a nice kind of corally red color. Absolutely beautiful. And now you have two images that are the same, and it didn't take long to do it all. Now I decided to make this a traditional card size, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, but instead of a rectangle, I'm doing an oval. So I'm using the Spellbinders Stylish Oval die set. I'm using the second largest die here. So the second largest and lining it up around our floral stamping, and I'll die cut that. Then I'm using the largest oval die, which is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and cutting that from black cardstock. I'm using a black trim again, inspired by Gina herself. Gina likes to use a small black trim on her cards, so both of my cards today have a black trim. Now you could use a little sentiment strip die to cut a little window for your sentiment here, but I thought it'd be fun to cut right across the entire panel and have an acetate window there, so it's kind of floating. So I'm taking these two and just temporarily adhering them together, just using a little bit of tape runner. And then I'm going to cut about a 1/2 inch section out of the middle. Now you could use a die to cut this strip out, but honestly, I just decided to eyeball it. So I'm cutting a little bit below where my stamping stops on the top, and then a little bit above where my stamping stops on the bottom. Sorry, my head gets in the way here and there. Sometimes you just got to look from straight above to make sure you're getting everything straight. So now I have my oval with just a little gap cut out of the center. Now we need to reconnect these two halves of the oval with acetate for the gap between. So I have a large white oval die cut there that I'm just using as a guide to get the placement right. On the back of my two floral oval halves, I'm putting some adhesive right along the straight edge. I'm lining it up with that solid oval die cut just as a guide. Now there are a few ways to do this. This is what made sense to me at the time. Now I'll take a strip of clear acetate, any clear, strong packaging, and put it right along that gap. This will connect the two halves together and create a window that you'll be able to see through. Now I can trim the acetate off of the two edges. Again, there are many ways you can do this. This is just one of the ways. If you want to make this easier, you could have just used a shorter sentiment strip die and cut a window that way. Now I can flip this over and put adhesive on the back of all of this, just avoiding where that acetate gap is. And we can take our two black pieces, line up the straight edges, and add it to the back. So now that acetate is sandwiched between the floral stamped pieces and the black pieces. So this forms our card front. Okay, next we'll take this piece and lay it into the corner of our MISTI stamping tool. I'm sorry I'm doing this towards the bottom of my screen. I'm not sure why I did that. I apologize, but I still think you can see what I'm doing. I'm lining up the Thinking of You sentiment that's in this same stamp set, lining it up right onto that acetate window. I'll close the door on my stamping tool to grab the sentiment. Then I'll take that card front out, and we can create the back of our card. For the back of the card, I used the large oval once again for black and the slightly smaller oval for white, just like the card front, but this is all solid with no stamping. You can see lines up nicely. So now I'll take the back of our card, put it into the MISTI stamping tool, and I can stamp the thinking of you right there along the middle, and I know it will line up with our window. So there are so many different ways you can create windows for your sentiments. It's really a great way to create a card that's a little bit different. And generally, you can find acetate that works for these windows in recycled materials, or you can buy sheets of acetate from craft stores. Next, I need to create a hinge at the top of this panel. Now on this, I'm going to score about 3/4 of an inch from the top. You could do a little more, you could do a little less. It really doesn't matter. Now I'm doing this a few times because I'm trying to score through 2 layers of cardstock. And then I'll fold along that score line and fold back and forth a bit. At this point, I realize I don't need both of those layers, so I'm just going to take my scissors to cut off that white right along the score line. We'll just use the black for the hinge of our card. All right, now onto that little black hinge up there, I'll put some strong adhesive. You want to use something you'll trust here. So I'm using Gina K Connect in the fine tip bottle. And I will take this and place it right onto the back of our card front. And I'll press down there on the top to make sure you get a really good connection, because that's what forms how our card opens and closes. Now, to make sure our card stands up straight without kind of wobbling over, I like to cut just a thin straight edge off of the inside of our card. So just a little bit off this. That gives it a flat edge there that allows it to stand up without it kind of teetering or wobbling over. Now to finish this off, I again added some of those Moonstone gems, but you can see how you have this little sentiment window that goes right across this shaped card. And I cut a little bit off the bottom inside so it stands up beautifully. And we have that beautiful ink blended stamping. It really is a fun way to get more out of large solid images like this. If you're one like me who doesn't like to color in images, you can always add a lot of color by doing multi-inking. All right, so there you have it. A few tips and techniques for you today. If you're interested in the products that I used, I do have them linked below in my YouTube description. And at the end here, I'll link to a couple other related technique videos if you're looking for more ideas. I really thank you for spending this time with me. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you soon with more ideas.